So we're going to go ahead and move on to the weather update. So Dr. Andresen is going to go ahead and let us know what we're in for here.
Well, thanks, Erica, and good morning. And as Eric mentioned here, a gorgeous morning across the state. A couple more probably coming, but as you'll see in the theme of our forecast here, we're looking at the development of heat wave conditions here, probably beginning, at least by definition, if we use 90-degree high temperatures for much of the state, it'll begin today and continue on into the upcoming 4th of July holiday. If there were ever a forecast that sort of screamed 4th of July weather forecast, this would probably be it. But I have on here, starting with an upper air map, and we talk so much about the upper air and its influence on our weather on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. And well, today it's, and actually for the last couple of days, it's been almost the same thing, but there's a lot to say here. It really sets the tone for most of what I'm going to talk about. But if we look at North America here, most of the time when we look at the jet stream flow across North America, it's mostly west to east, and that's the meteorologists say we've got a zonal flow. Well, that means, again, mostly west to east, and that's true all the way around the hemisphere, the North Hemisphere and the South Hemisphere for that matter. But if you look at the map here today, you see that is definitely not the case. We've got a couple of big troughs, one out over the western part of North America here, where the blue color is, and then over on the east coast, we've got another one. And note that they're both relatively cut off from the main flow of the jet stream, which is further to the north. And then in between these two features, we've got a big upper air ridge. And these patterns where we've got more north to south flow rather than west to east are referred to sometimes with blocky or meridional flow. But one of the hallmarks of this is that it's basically a situation where we see little change, very little change. And that is exactly what we're dealing with here right now and are likely to deal with here for the next several days. We happen to be underneath, you can see Michigan's right under square under the middle of this feature. And under these ridges, we've got sinking air, subsidence, and basically it's a big dome of hot air. It's hard for precipitation to move into this convection. We've actually seen that on the radar here over the last several days. So warmer and drier than normal under the ridge, and then almost the opposite under the troughs. If you went out to the Pacific Northwest right now, they're dealing with unusually cool and wet weather for this time of the year, and it's because of this pattern. And that's really setting the stage here for what we're going to see for much of the upcoming week. Looking here, though, real quickly at where we've been over the last week, we did have a warmer than normal week, again, for the last 7 days. Mean temperatures here generally ranging from 2 to 4 degrees Fahrenheit above normal, especially over the last several days. More importantly, I think, if we look at the precipitation totals in the gauge here at the map, we see, unfortunately, a lot of areas, especially across the northern part of the state, eastern UP, and into the northern lower, we had little or no precipitation. But just as importantly, with the system that went through late Friday and into Saturday morning, which unfortunately brought some severe weather and some wind damage, but we also got some of the most significant rainfall we've seen across southern lower Michigan in some time. And that did include portions of southeastern lower Michigan, which are among the driest areas here in Michigan. You can see that on the map here. Much of this area got between 1/2 and 1 inch. The yellow here, they did better than that. That's more than 2 inches. You can see a fairly large swath, again, across the southern third of the lower. There were actually even a couple reports of 3 inch or better with some localized flooding. You go from too little to too much. But again, that is important, especially given the forecast that we're looking at, which is basically hot and dry for at least the next several days. Degree day totals here for the season, with the warmer than normal weeks still running from a couple days ahead of normal across southern portions of the state to a couple days behind in the far north. But we're not, I think the message here, overall message is we're still pretty close to the long-term climatology for this time of the year for the beginning of July. And in terms of moisture here are the drought monitor. This is the latest one. They're going to be revising that here today. But again, an area of growing dryness across portions of the eastern Corn Belt, and it does extend up into the far southern and southeastern portions of the lower peninsula here. That's something to watch. And on the right here, I've got another index. It's called the Evaporative Demand Index. It looks at really the meteorological conditions relative to what water is available, and it's a good index to describe the demand for water. And when it's not being met, we see problems, or again, the plants can't keep up with the demand, and that's when we see these browns and oranges develop. And for this particular index, again, that'll be updated here shortly, that much of the Midwest and certainly much of the Great Lakes region is showing stress, and this is because of the warm, sunny days where there's high atmospheric demand, and the soil moisture, it's still there at depth, but it just can't supply the demand at the time. And that's pretty much what we're looking at for the next several days. Well, on the weather map this morning, underneath that big upper air ridge that I talked about here earlier, you can see surface high pressure, and that's why we've got, well, a gorgeous morning. And one of the things that's interesting about this is right now, anyway, our dew point temperatures are only in the upper 50s to low 60s. And so it could be worse in terms of this heat, and adding 90-degree high temperatures, which is what we're looking at for the next several days. It could be worse if the dew point temperatures were up in the, let's say, the mid-upper 60s, low 70s. That's when it would be really uncomfortable. But the air is still, at this point, relatively dry. We will see gradually increasing humidities as we move into the weekend here, but at least for now and for the next couple of days, it's not bad. It's like it is out west when they have high temperatures, but low humidities, or relatively low humidities, a little bit more comfortable. And it also allows our nighttime temperatures to fall back in right now into the upper 50s to near 60s. So very, very comfortable conditions, but very, very dry as well. And as I thumb through these here, this is tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. It's essentially almost the same map. High pressure just continues to be parked, and that's, again, because that upper air feature is not moving at all. And into Saturday morning, there's another one. There is a chance, there's a weak disturbance that'll be moving across the region, very weak, tomorrow on Friday, that could set off a couple of isolated showers, but besides that, no precipitation here expected, at least for the next several days. One of the other interesting pieces about this is being right underneath this high pressure, there's very little pressure gradient or change in pressure with distance. It's going to be a relatively calm, or well, the winds will be relatively calm. They will be calm almost at night, and even during the day, they won't be very strong. So if you have spraying condition or spraying to do here, the next several days are going to be very, very well easy to work with, at least during the daytime, because we won't have that strong winds that develop during the middle and latter part of the daytime hours. We just won't see that. They'll increase once we get into next week, but for the next several days, winds will be abnormally light. It's something to think about. Also, we will have at nighttime, we will have still relatively calm conditions with inversions. That's another issue, of course, you want to be thinking about as well. It's a lot. Inversions can be a real problem when you want to keep material in a certain place, and we will be seeing those almost on a daily or nightly basis here for the next several days as well. Precipitation totals, as I mentioned, are expected to be very light over much of the next upcoming week. You can see totals here for the 7-day total through next Thursday morning, generally expected to be less than 1/4 of an inch. Most of this precipitation that you see here, or at least what's suggested, would be beginning early next week. We will see almost a daily chance for scattered showers and thunderstorms, but it's not a major widespread event. There will be some areas might see some much needed, very beneficial rainfall. Many others will see little or nothing. So again, scattered is the operative phrase as we move into next week. At least we will have a chance for some precipitation beginning probably even by late Sunday in the far northern parts of the state up in the Upper Peninsula, and then spreading south and eastward by Monday and into Tuesday into Wednesday. So at least there'll be continuing chances. They just won't be very high. So no real end, at least in terms of the moisture or anything to change the situation that we're in right now. Just as importantly, water demand. This is a new product I haven't shown before, but it's a graphic of weekly potential evapotranspiration rates. This is the atmospheric demand based on the forecast weather conditions up through next Thursday morning. And for the weekly total, you can see that ranges from about 1.3 inches along lakeshore areas where it's a little cooler to as much as 1.7 inches. That translates to about 0.2 to 1/4 of an inch per day. And for Michigan, climatologically, that's up near the top of what we ever experience here, especially on a day-to-day basis. And so we're looking at just like we did a couple weeks ago, we're looking at almost a repeat day to day with high atmospheric demand. the water's not there, it won't evaporate, of course, but it puts the plant under stress if it can't keep up. So high atmospheric demand is definitely where we're headed here. And these conditions are expected to continue at least for the next couple of weeks. Both the 6 to 10 day and 8 to 14 day outlooks are calling for that ridging feature, while a little bit lower amplitude than it is right now. You can see that on the left here, still troughs over the western and eastern portions of North America. But underneath this ridge, it's a no-brainer, very, very high likelihood of warmer than normal weather across much of the Midwest. This does bear watching, I think, and I'm going to talk about this too because of our new monthly outlook as well. But this pattern, given it's occurring in the midsummer, or what we're coming into the midsummer pattern, sometimes these patterns have they can last longer than they would be otherwise. And moisture, just as importantly as the warm temperatures, you can see we've got a little bit of a mixed bag. And the medium range guidance suggests that northern parts of the state may actually become a little bit wetter than normal here during the next week or next 2 weeks. But you can see just to our south an area of drier than normal conditions. So that it's going to be touchy. But right now, the guidance suggests that northern parts of the state will do better for precipitation than the south as we move into the middle of July. I just mentioned we have a new updated outlook. This was issued just on Tuesday morning for the month of July. It has changed a little bit. Remember, the old outlook for July did call for warmer than normal mean temperatures, and that's certainly the case for the updated or the most recent version. But there have been changes with the precipitation, and they're not positive ones. And that is that the outlook had been calling for no forecast direction, that equal chances category of below, near, and above normal. It now has moved in for much of Michigan, nearly all of Michigan, to a drier than normal. So warmer and drier. This largely reflects some of the medium range forecast guidance that you just saw, and it's been very consistent. And again, one last thought about that, as I alluded to this, once we move into this time of the season, these upper air patterns, sometimes they persist longer than they would at other times of the year, especially during the transitions. It's something that definitely bears watching. And it's also important, this is not just for Michigan, it is for much of the Midwest. So we will likely see some changes, certainly reductions in soil moisture, increases in moisture stress type conditions here, definitely in parts of the Midwest, and it probably will include portions of Michigan as well for the next few weeks. So summing up here, hot and dry and heat wave conditions for the next several days. We'll be looking at a string of 90-degree high temperatures here of several days. It's been a few years since we've had that in Michigan. And then beginning at the end of the weekend, the holiday weekend, and into next week, we will start to see at least a chance for some scattered showers and thunderstorms moving northwest to southeast. But it is not a major weather system. It'll be hit and miss. In some areas will get moisture, others will not. Our temperatures will be averaging a full 5 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit above normal for the next several days, with highs again from the upper 80s north to the low 90s south, and then lows generally in the 60s. So we'll be piling on the degree days, but we'll also, given the high atmospheric demand, we'll also be putting moisture load and stress on much of our vegetation. And as I also talked about, relatively light daytime winds, and that's something we don't see all the time, but we're looking at an extended period of that. And finally, our medium and even beyond that, our long lead guidance suggests that this warm, dry pattern will last at least for the next couple of weeks, and maybe even it could be longer than that. We'll be keeping an eye on that. So with that, a reminder of next week's speaker, Dr. Esangani, who's going to be talking about drainage design considerations here. That's next Thursday. So be with us here. That'll be on the 9th. And with that, I'll wrap up here and see if anyone has any questions. Thanks, Erica.
Yeah, thank you. There were just a few questions that came through really quickly here, Dr. Andresen. So the first one, does the ridge make us prone to temperature inversions?
A good question, and the answer is in general yes. And not always, but in this case, definitely it does. And there will be almost on a daily, well, let's call it a nightly basis, we will be facing the strong likelihood of inversion conditions. And that would be, on the Enviro Weather, our Mesonet, there is actually a couple places where you can go and look for when inversions form. We've got this not at all of our sites, but at a handful of sites across the state, we do have measurements of temperature on the vertical, and it does outline when we do have inversions. But in general, we will be seeing those develop in the mid to late evening hours, 8, 9 p.m. And you can tell where the wind stops. Of course, it's still light now because of the long days, but you will see the wind die down. That's when those inversions start. And with an inversion physically, what you have happening is instead of the temperature decreasing as you go up, which is the normal situation, it's either, the same, or the temperature warms as you go up. And because of that, it basically stills the atmosphere. There's very, very little movement, and that's why inversions are a problem certainly for many, many spray operations. Those would be expected to continue, the inversions, through the nighttime hours until around, it's right after sunrise. And again, sunrise now is still really, really early, but I would expect the inversions to be there until about this time of the day. Maybe by 8 a.m. they should be gone. How do you know that those are gone? Well, if you see movement of air, a little bit of breeze with the leaves moving and so forth, you probably have already broken through it. But it takes a little bit of time as the sun comes back the next morning to heat the surface up and to start to mix things up. That's when those inversions break down. So you've got literally about a 12-hour, 10 to 12-hour period during the mid-evening to the next morning where you very likely will have inversions here for the next several days.
2 more questions for you, Jeff. So there was a nice rain towards the coast from storms that fired 30 miles inland and then moved towards the lake. It almost never happens that way. Any chance for more of this?
No, those folks, and that occurred, as most of you remember. Actually, there was some on Monday afternoon, including one up near Grand Rapids, but most of this was that southwestern corner of the state down to from about Grand Rapids down to Berrien. And on Tuesday morning, it was incredible. Those storms went up, and if you got one of those, you should go buy a lottery ticket. That was a very, very being in the right place at the right time to get some moisture. Some areas got more than half an inch with that, but that was definitely the exception. And unfortunately, we likely will not see that here, or that opportunity again, where most areas are just going to be hot and dry. Possibly something pops up tomorrow afternoon, but it'll be very, very isolated. So that was a one-time deal, and it was just on the edge of that upper ridge that I talked about today. They were just close enough, and since Tuesday morning when we had those showers, that feature has generally shifted off to the west. That's off to the west. That's one thing we also don't see very often, is our weather moving from east to west as it did on Tuesday morning, but that was an example. So that was a one-off type of deal. And
Great. One last question, and then I have just a couple comments from some of our specialists that I'll briefly mention. Are we setting up for a spider mite problem in a few weeks, potentially?
It's Chris on?
Yeah, I asked my own question because I don't know. So
Okay.
just throwing that out there as a thought. So
one just comment here, and just because I participated in a couple of other meetings here, but the folks in the tree fruit sector are quite concerned about this, and see a major issue. And I'll just leave it at that. I'm not the entomologist, but the other people are certainly talking about this.
Yeah.
Great. So just a couple other comments here. Advanced corn in the southwest is V8 to V10, so the moisture stress will likely to begin to take its toll at this growth stage. Caution should be taken while making herbicide applications because of inversion and hot weather. Remember, there are some herbicides that can move easily. So we do have another question for Dr. Andresen. Dr. Andresen, can you share how to get the weekly PET map for Michigan or Great Lakes area? And then how does the quality of info compare to the MAWN reference data?
Right. Yeah. Let me, certainly can share a screen. And I also, in the meantime, brought up a graphic here. This is from EnviroWeather. And this is an example. We have a couple of options for inversion monitoring in Michigan currently. This is one of the I guess the deluxe versions. We've got two 66-foot towers, one at Sparta and one at Williamsburg. And while it's at a couple locations, it's fairly representative of the area. But what you see here on the top. This is for the our tower at Sparta or near Sparta. We're taking temperatures or measuring temperatures at 4 different levels vertically. 66 feet at the top. That's the dark brown. The orange is down at 33 feet, and then the red is our standard 5 foot level above the surface, and then the green is down at a foot above the surface itself, so down near the ground surface. But you can see what happened. This is a time series looking at temperatures over the last 24 hours. You can see that in general during the day, as I mentioned, temperatures get a little cooler as you go up in the atmosphere. But last night we had and this is typically happens on a diurnal basis. You can see that the surface cools off more quickly. Right around, you can see between 8:30 and 9 p.m. last night is when we had inversion conditions develop last night at Sparta. And quickly you can see that that temperature, that inversion strength was up between 5 and 10 degrees. And up here, the graphic above, this is actually the strength, the difference in temperature between 66 feet and 5 feet down in the surface. But when you've got those positive levels like that, there's virtually no movement in the atmosphere, which is when you have problems. The wind speeds here are also noted on this one because when things stir up, you can see the inversion also breaks down. There's a very, very strong relationship between the two. So it's one way, at least, of looking at what the conditions are like out there. One more option that we have is something called our temperature inversion potential. On all of the stations in EnviroWeather, you can click this, and this gives you on an hourly basis, real time, 24/7. This is for 7 locations, and this is only looking at the lowest 10 feet, but that's still where a lot of those spray operations take place. And if it's green, it means that temperatures are cooling as you go up, which means that there is inversion. The reds are the opposite when you have an inversion still here. This is the one from 7 o'clock this morning, and you can see at 5 of the 7 sites, we still had inversion conditions here. Those will be breaking up probably over the next hour. So that's, again, if I back up, when you look at the menus for each of the stations, that's under temperature inversion potential, and then that'll bring up that graphic that I just showed. So that's where to get the inversion. To get to the National Weather Service forecast graphical product, that's off of a digital.weather.gov. This is a new site that the Weather Service has created, and it's a little difficult to get to this one. It took me a little time to find this, but notice that they have a graphical forecast across the entire lower 48 for a number of different variables. If you pop up this menu down here where it says maximum temperature is the default, go to the last one. It's the last one on this entire list down here, total weekly FRET, and it's the reference evapotranspiration. You click on that, and you'll come up with the map that I showed, except what I did was I zoomed in a little bit for Michigan, and this is the map that I showed. So again, that reference evapotranspiration, and finally the important is a very, very good question. Does this compare with what we have in EnviroWeather? The answer is yes. We use the same methodology. It's basically, this one though is looking at forecast conditions for the next 7 days and adding those up, but it uses the same methodology to get that reference evapotranspiration rate. And it's a level unshaded grass canopy that's about 4 inches high. That's what the reference crop is, and everything, whether you're dealing with seed corn or soybeans or any other irrigated crops, they all relate back to that reference value, and that's what you see here.